So let's get started. And Dustin, if anyone just wants to come in during the intros, you can let them in. But once we get into the main part of the event, we'll just keep it closed. So hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited about bringing you this event today. Imposter syndrome is something that I know a lot of people struggle with. I know I've struggled with it a lot myself. I hear about it often with my clients, with people who I work with. It often comes up in conversation. I see posts about it all the time, articles, but I've never really seen anyone do a practical session on what it is, how to overcome it, what it actually means for people, how to get a better understanding of it, and how to move through it. So that kind of inspired today. I'll just do a really quick intro to myself and the other hosts that I have with me today. So my name is Sophie Ash, and I'm the founder of Prospology. We're a careers coaching company. We work exclusively with medical writers, mostly freelancers who are getting into the industry or just trying to get started with their first couple of clients, mostly in the US and some in Canada as well. And so we do these events roughly once a month on different topics in medical writing. And so if you have any ideas of other events that you want to see, you can reach out to us and let us know. So I'll hand over to Dustin and Anand to give themselves a brief bio now, and then I'll talk you through the structure of the event. Dustin, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi guys, my name is Dustin. I work at Prospology as the digital content manager. I generally take care of all the back-end stuff, all the technical issues, and I take care of that. But today I'm your moderator, and I'll be taking a look at the chat and helping Sophie and Anand answer all your questions.
Thank you. And we also have Anand Devasthanam with us. Anand, do you want to say hi and make a little intro?
Sure, absolutely. First off, thank you everyone for taking the time to attend this event. It's an absolute pleasure to answer all of your questions and to speak about this topic, which I think is very important, but we don't get to talk about it as much. I am a scientist by training, a writer by passion, and a storyteller by nature. I began my career in medical writing, and right now I work as a medical strategist in an advertising company, which is just so much fun. So back to you, Sophie.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so before we jump in, if you're able to put video on, we're just going to do a really quick screenshot of everyone just to be able to say that we did this and we showed up. And so if you can just quickly turn on your camera, we'll do a really quick shot of everyone. Oh, so good to see your faces. Okay. Oh, hello. Hi. All right, so I'll count down. 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Thank you. So feel free to stay on camera if you want. It's so nice to actually see you while we're talking, but you don't have to. Okay, so we're going to jump in and start with some poll questions. So Dustin, I'll let you take the lead on that. We just have a few questions to basically see where all of you are at. They should be showing up on your screen now. So if you want to just take a few moments to fill those out, and you can scroll down. I think there's 3 questions. Yeah. And if you're driving, obviously, John, don't do it. By the way, these are all anonymous, so I don't know what you've actually said. And there's no way of me knowing who's voted what. So if you're worried about that, don't worry. Where's he? Oh, Holly just said you should be able to choose multiple answers, but you can't. Maybe we forgot to enable that for one of the questions. Maybe just pick your most applicable choice, just in case it doesn't let you choose more than one. Okay, we have 27 respondents. We'll just wait another minute. Okay, I think we've still got. I keep wanting to call it, and then I get another one come in. All right, 10 more seconds. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I'm ending the poll now. So everyone should be able to see the results of the poll right now, and I'll just kind of walk through them a little bit, because I'd like it to frame the conversation today. So it seems like most people have had imposter syndrome for quite a long time. I would definitely put myself in that category, and this matches up with the other smaller poll that we did on the event as well. So that is interesting. Other people, it started when their career started or when their latest project began. And then, okay, so the biggest feeling that we have is believing that others are more intelligent or capable. I definitely relate to that a lot. That's definitely the front runner there, and that we're not good enough. Yeah, that's another one. Okay. To what extent has it affected your life? A lot of pressure to succeed. Yeah, that's definitely huge. I'm not surprised that that is coming out on top. So we'll keep that in mind with our questioning, the pressure side of things, and the fact that most of you have been dealing with this for a long time. So thanks so much for answering those. So we're going to jump straight into the discussion. So Anand and I'll basically be interviewing him, but it will be a fairly informal discussion. We both have insights we want to share. Anand talks about this topic quite often. We'll do that for a good half hour or so, and then we'll have some Q&A. If you think of any questions or you want to make any comments at all during the session, just type them in the chat, and Dustin will be monitoring the chat. So we will have a Q&A portion towards the end. And then just in the last few minutes, I'll let you know about Prospology and where you can find us if you want any extra support. Okay, so Anand, let's get into the nitty-gritty of our conversation. So I'm going to bring up my notes here. So let's start by defining what imposter syndrome is for people who are a bit unsure about that phrase.
Sure, absolutely. And I think that the poll that you just presented is a really great setup to talking about the definition of imposter syndrome, because many of the questions that you asked, which really gets at feelings of insecurity and putting a lot of pressure on ourselves, and having this kind of a chronic feeling, which we feel not only at the beginning of our career, but as our career progresses, all constitute towards sustaining imposter syndrome. However, to get a better sense of this definition, I'd like to quickly read out 3 sentences which I have found extremely helpful in understanding imposter syndrome myself and also explaining it to others. So the first one is that imposter syndrome is characterized by chronic feelings of self-doubt and fear, the operative word here being chronic. The second is that despite evidence of abilities, those suffering from imposter syndrome are unable to internalize a sense of accomplishment, which again was echoed in one of the points in your survey. And people with imposter syndrome believe themselves to be less intelligent and less competent than others perceive them to be. So let's focus on some important words here. The first one is chronic. The second one is having abilities of success, but still believing that people may not be as successful. So One of the important analogies which has helped me to understand imposter syndrome and also explain it to others is the analogy of building a fire. You need three things to build a fire. One is heat, the second is a combustible substance, something which burns, and the third is oxygen. If two of these components are present but one is missing, you don't get a fire. The same is true with imposter syndrome as well. The feeling has to be chronic. There has to be evidence of a person's ability to succeed, and it's a belief system. If all three components come together, what you get is the perfect storm of imposter syndrome, the debilitating effects all of us have felt to some extent in our careers. Sometimes I have people asking me, if it's something which I don't feel all the time, if it's just nervousness which creeps up now and then, is it imposter syndrome? Probably not. Likewise, if it's not based on a belief system, or if there's no evidence of abilities, is it imposter syndrome? Probably not. And I specifically like this definition because it allows us to sit down and look at these words and introspect and find out, do I have abilities in my experience, in my history, in my past, in the way that I've lived my life, in the feedback that I've received from others? Have I succeeded at something in the past? More often than not, the question is, the answer is always yes. And if is this something that I believe in? Are others telling me that I'm not able to do it? Or am I telling myself that I'm not able to do it? Is this belief of my inability to achieve something a self-made story, or is it coming from the outside? More often than not, it's a self-made story. And of course, the third point is about feeling it in a chronic way, which is a feeling which is sustained long-term, as opposed to feeling it just over a weekend or some kind of jitters or nervousness which comes up now and then. So this is a framework which really helps us understand the elements which really hold up imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. And I think as we go through the conversation, if we can keep mapping things back onto those three areas, just to kind of reinforce that, because I think it is easy to think of it as a simple thing, or to define it in a way that doesn't really encompass what it means. And I personally find it quite challenging to explain it to people that don't seem to have it, as to how it affects me. My business partner, for example, he always says, how can you possibly feel like you're not a success? And how to answer that question is really challenging, because it's like, well, I see that other people see that I'm successful, but that doesn't mean that I feel that or that I believe that. It's a completely different thing. So thanks for sharing that. I guess my next question then is how might imposter syndrome show up specifically in the medical writing industry? How have you seen it show up either in yourself or in people that you interact with?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that I've noticed is that people who have felt imposter syndrome might try to suppress it to some extent, but really one way of overcoming it is to really understand imposter syndrome and to do certain exercises, which we'll talk about in a moment. Do certain exercises to overcome imposter syndrome. It's exactly like going to a gym and strengthening your muscles. You have to be able to put in the work in order to overcome imposter syndrome, and it's possible. It's possible for anyone to do. Because at the end of the day, imposter syndrome is a belief system. And there's a really inspiring saying that goes, a mind with the power to build something also has the power to break it down. So if we have unconsciously built imposter syndrome, that means we also have the power to break it down. But coming back to your question on where it might creep up, one source is suppressed imposter syndrome, which hasn't been overcome, can come back again. To give you an example, I had a lot of imposter syndrome when it came to going from academia to industry. And when I finally made that transition happen, I felt that I had overcome imposter syndrome, and now it's going to be smooth sailing from now on. But I was wrong, because even after I had made the transition, there were all kinds of thoughts and feelings which I was encountering within the first year or so of my very first medical writing role. And one of the things that new writers do, or early career writers do, is that when we begin to feel imposter syndrome, we begin to question our entire skill set. Instead of saying, this is something which is weighing me down, this is probably something which I need to think about and address, we begin questioning everything. We begin questioning our ability to think, our ability to articulate thoughts, our ability to construct sentences, our ability to communicate with clients, our ability to be a good team player. We begin questioning everything. So the biggest indicator of imposter syndrome possibly sabotaging your career is if it gets you to start questioning everything you're capable of. That means you have to take a step back and tell yourself, I don't need to be questioning everything that I'm capable of. I'm capable of all of this and so much more. There is some other thought which is driving me to ask these questions. And that thought is probably the seed of imposter syndrome.
Yeah. And so I guess you and I have that in common then, where we've taken various different paths in medical writing or allied to medical writing, and it's continued to show up differently in different situations. Or like you said, you might feel as though you've overcome it, but then you challenge yourself in a new way, or you're faced with a new situation where you feel like somebody might be questioning your abilities, or your dedication, or your intellect, or something that triggers that insecurity, and then it comes up again. And I definitely resonate with what you said about how it can show up in one area of your life, and then it can end up kind of spilling into all these other areas as well. It could make you even question how good of a friend you are, how good of a partner you are, how good of a business person you are, or whatever it looks like for you. So yeah, I think there's no one way of saying, oh, that person has it. But I think when it's happening to you and you're feeling it come up, and you're noticing that it changes your behaviors or your thoughts or your emotions, and makes you maybe pull away from things that you otherwise would have done more fearlessly or more proactively. Maybe people would shy away from putting themselves forward for something, or declining a project that they don't feel confident enough to take. And that could just be timing related. If something had happened that had triggered the imposter syndrome, and then it kind of spills out into those other areas. Would you agree?
Absolutely, yes. It does, spill over into other areas. And I've also noticed that when we begin to feel it first, often the first reaction is to blame ourselves. And that actually makes it worse.
Yeah. And I know for me, I feel pretty anxious about admitting it to people, especially if I don't feel that they would understand, or that they experience it themselves. So I find myself looking for rational reasons why I feel the way I do, and struggling because deep down I know it's not really a rational thing. Like, I could see why I have the skill set to be able to do something, or I could see why someone would trust me to be able to take something on and deliver it and be reliable. But then in my mind, I'm like, why are they coming to me? Why aren't they going to someone else? What if I let them down? What if I'm not good enough? And it's really challenging, I think, to speak out. But I also think that if you're not able to recognize it, or seek support from someone who you trust, it becomes very difficult then to manage it, because it's not a purely rational thing to deal with. It's almost like when you try to ignore your emotions, they just come back stronger and stronger. It's still there, and you still need to acknowledge it in order to move past it. What do you say to that?
I think those are some very interesting observations. Um, it reminds me of a saying which I wrote down, in my notebook and keep going back to time and time again. And it goes, it's not who you are that holds you back. It's who you think you're not. It's not who you are that holds you back. It's who you think you're not.
Mm.
And when you think about the thought process which you go through when a little trigger of imposter syndrome hits, most of those inner statements begin with I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I'm not at that level. I'm not this. I'm not that.
Yeah.
Pay attention to those I'm not statements. And if they're happening more frequently, it's time to address it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we'll get into some of the ways that we can manage it towards the second half of our conversation. Um, I guess just looking back at my questions here. Um, So you and I don't know about you, Anand, but I have had this for as long as I can remember. And I have had phases of my life where it's been a lot more prominent and others where it's been less noticeable. And I think they directly correlate with the amount that I've been pushing myself or challenging myself, or, if there's been a big change, or people expecting more of me at that time, or I'm expecting more of myself at that time. It will feel like it's more unmanageable, and it can feel really paralyzing at times. And I think over the years I have learned how to get more support with it and how to handle it better. But I think for me personally, I think it will always be there to some extent. And I think it's always going to be about how I choose to manage it, handle it. What is your experience in terms of how it's reared its head over the years, and do you still suffer from it now?
Well, so the first time I began, having imposter syndrome, I was blaming myself a lot because I didn't know exactly what it was. And I thought that this experience was unique to me. But when I found out that this is something which others also feel, finding out alone took so much of the load off my shoulders. To know that this was, in fact, a shared experience which others also feel, took a significant amount of load off on my shoulders because the blame game stopped. And I could really begin to examine, what is the source of this? Also, I sat down and I meditated a bit. And one of the mental models which has really helped is to think about imposter syndrome as a train. I think about my mind as a passenger waiting at a train station. And I think about imposter syndrome as a train. So what used to happen earlier is that I would unconsciously just get on the train. No matter where the train was headed, as soon as it came into the station, I would just jump onto it because I didn't know any better. But educating myself about imposter syndrome and thinking about this within the perspective of this working model where my mind could be a passenger on the station and imposter syndrome could be a train, it gave me the power to say, I'm not going to get on that train. I'm going to let it pass. And that's been a huge help personally.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great analogy. I would imagine a lot of people listening to that would say, is that even possible? Or how long did it take you to strengthen that muscle of being able to recognize it, decide I'm not getting on, and then let it go by? Like, over what time frame did it take for you to be able to achieve that? And do you still sometimes get on without realizing it and then decide to get off?
Yes, I still sometimes get on without realizing it. And there were a few thoughts and a few exercises which really helped. So in terms of thoughts, first off, I would constantly remind myself that imposter syndrome is a belief. And the more I believe in it, the more I give weight to that thought, the more real it becomes. So constantly reminding myself that it's a belief system is something which helped. I would also tell myself that it's a natural phenomenon. I would tell myself that this is not something abnormal. I would tell myself that, these feelings of, questioning myself is a natural feeling.
Mm.
And that gave it a sense of, it turned it into a problem which I could tackle. And after having spoken with a few people who were willing to speak about imposter syndrome, either one-on-one or in a small group setting, I began to realize that imposter syndrome is a human experience. Sometimes we attach imposter syndrome with events in our lives. We say, I'm feeling this way because I moved to another country and I'm starting off from square one, and that's the reason why I'm feeling this way. We might say, I moved from one industry to another, and that's why I'm feeling this way. We might say, I'm feeling this way because of the way I look, or because of my culture. Or we start assigning reasons, and we start forming these attachments between imposter syndrome and other areas of our lives or other areas of our individuality. But when I tell myself that it's a human experience, it really helped me in having conversations and talking about imposter syndrome and even being a more productive employee, because when I'm having a conversation with someone, I tell myself, the person I'm speaking with could also be feeling some sense of what I'm feeling. If I'm feeling a sense of imposter syndrome, the person I'm speaking to, even though they may be more qualified, even though they may be several steps above me in the corporate hierarchy, even though they might have a lot more knowledge and insight, they might be feeling some sense of this in there. So it's that shared feeling, and the acknowledgement of that shared feeling makes it easier to tolerate and makes it easier to overcome.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And that brings me to a couple of questions. Well, one is more of an experience, really. I have my own communications agency, my business partner and I, and I know there's been one or two instances where we've been on client calls, and the client has admitted to us that they don't really know what they're doing. They've been tasked with completing this project. They've had to get our help with it because they don't have internal capabilities or capacities, or maybe they haven't even done that type of project before, or they don't even know the full extent to which it's going to require their time and resources and involvement. And so I notice a huge shift in the energy when somebody says, we don't really know what we're doing. And then it kind of opens up the conversation to everyone saying, well, we don't really know either. Or, we've done this and we've done that. And we can see kind of how it's supposed to fit together, but we may not have done this exact thing before. And it's such a relief for everyone when we all just admit that we're doing the best we can and we're figuring it out together and we're collaborating and we're just seeing it as a challenge. And I think the more that I've seen that over the years, and the more I've realized, like, wow, everybody has this, or almost everybody has this. And it doesn't matter what level you're at or how many years experience you have. It's anyone is prone to having it, and they may or may not talk about it. They may or may not let it affect how they show up in the workplace, but I see it as a positive thing when somebody is able to talk about it, because that way um, everyone can come together and figure it out, or you can get the support that you need, and it kind of normalizes it in a way. And not that we should just be kind of not doing anything about it, but I think you made a great point that it's almost like saying, I don't want to feel pain. Like everybody feels pain. You can't really just decide that you don't want to feel that. It's gonna happen. It's just a matter of, okay, what am I gonna do about it? I forgot what my other question was. But I want to kind of start to segue into the more practical side of things so we can really get into that. And I'm sure people will have questions as well. Um, I guess you already kind of spoke to this a little bit. But do you think that it is possible to kind of get rid of it? Or do you think that certain people are just prone to it and it will always be there, and it's more a case of accepting it and trying to live with it? I know that you talked about kind of guilt that might be associated with it, or kind of the tendency to attach it to specific scenarios and say, well, it's not my fault, it's this. Um, is the first step to kind of acknowledge that there's that attachment being made, and to realize, no, it's actually my responsibility to to handle this.
That's a great question, and also very practical. I just realized that I had forgotten to answer one of your previous questions, which is, how long it took me to overcome imposter syndrome.
Hmm.
It took me about 2 years, beginning with the very first thought of, imposter syndrome is not something which I feel, it's something which is kind of prevalent, not only within biomedical sciences, but, people in all kinds of industries feel this. So beginning from that very initial thought to going to a place where I could actually begin advising people on what kinds of exercises that they can be doing in order to overcome imposter syndrome, that whole process took about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But let's come back to your question on, what we can be doing to either rid ourselves of imposter syndrome, overcome it, or take this other route of either accepting it or learning to live with it. I would definitely not recommend either acceptance or learning to live with it. And I say that because I have come across people who have overcome imposter syndrome. I've come across people who have faced it and challenged their beliefs and found ways of overcoming it. So I know it's possible. Have I overcome it completely? No, but I know it's possible. So I still keep striving. I still keep trying. And I know that someday I will be in a position where I can recognize imposter syndrome even before it comes, and be in a position where I can say, okay, it's coming, and I know how to react, and I know how not to get on that train. And I know that every single person, listening in today will come to that position. It just requires effort. So let's talk about what that effort means. And I'll share a few experiences which have helped me a lot. The first thing which helped me is to become a resource for others. And this is something which I began doing when I was transitioning from academia to industry. If someone needed help, finding information about that industry transition, I would help them out in any small capacity that I could. If I took a course, I would share my notes from the online course on LinkedIn or on a Facebook group or with a few friends. I would put out anonymous, I wouldn't say anonymous, but I would just put out random requests on LinkedIn saying, I am in academia, transitioning, planning on transitioning into a medical writing role. And I have done a lot of research on the different types of medical writing. And I've done a lot of research on the difference between, medical writing in a CRO versus an agency versus a pharma. So if you want to have a conversation with me and pick my brain about my research, then call me.
Mm-hmm.
So becoming a resource for others was a huge plus in slowly chipping away at imposter syndrome. And I would recommend that to you as well. There is no one specific method. I mean, you have to brainstorm, you got to look at your life and find out, okay, how can I become a resource? How can I start helping others? If you've done a lot of research on becoming a freelancer, then there's nothing stopping you from, putting out a random message saying, I've done all this research on becoming a freelancer. So if that's a life you're considering, call me.
Mm-hmm.
So becoming a resource was a huge plus. The other exercise which really helped is to speak with other medical writers and to seek stories, informational interviews. And I'm sure everyone here has done at least one informational interview. I'm certain of it because it's just so common and ubiquitous these days. But it's also important to realize that speaking with others and getting a sense of what their story is like is helpful in dissolving imposter syndrome, because you realize that some of their challenges and insecurities are exactly the same as some of your challenges and insecurities.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that level of knowing their challenges and insecurities helps you in further putting your own in perspective.
Yeah.
And the third thing which really helped is to reach out to people and provide guidance or provide support, provide help using any channel which might be helpful to you. If you like writing blogs, then set up a goal for yourself of one blog every 2 weeks or something like that, and keep that as an exercise. Keep contributing to the world. Teach your mind that you are a contributor. teach your mind that you are capable and that you are successful. The mind can be trained in a way that you want it to be trained. And sometimes you have to do these exercises in the physical world to influence what's going on in the inner world. So, to give you an example, I began making YouTube videos. The motivation to make YouTube videos was to help me overcome my imposter syndrome. And now I've uploaded over 50 YouTube videos on medical writing. What began as a very simple exercise to try and contribute a little something to the world, not much, just a little drop, that's all it takes. It doesn't have to be a major project that you need to undertake in order to overcome imposter syndrome. This doesn't have to be something large which you need to plan on a spreadsheet and undertake and fund with lots of money. It can be any small act of contribution that you can make, and it really goes a long way in training yourself and training your mind into changing those "I am not" statements into "I can" statements.
I really love that so much. And I remembered what my question was from earlier, and I think it kind of relates to this practical element. So I'm going to bring it back. I was wondering, because you were talking about imposter syndrome being a belief, and the fact that it's kind of so ingrained in the way that your brain processes things instinctively, and that's why it requires time and effort to kind of change that belief. Does figuring out where that belief come from help in sort of letting go of some of the hold that it might have over you? And I ask this from my own experience because I came from an abusive childhood where I was often told that I wasn't good enough, or I was told that I had caused problems or that I wouldn't succeed. And, that's where the belief came from for me. And obviously, I'm sure there are many other factors that play into it, but for me to kind of realize that that voice in my head was not my own voice, and that people aren't actually criticizing me all the time, that happened in the past and that is not currently happening, that has helped me to sort of unpick and detach myself a little bit from it, to be able to not get on the train so often. Just wondering what your thoughts are there.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry you had to go through all that, but then again, thank you for sharing that and using it to inspire so many of us, because you have accomplished so much in your career, and it's truly an inspiration to everyone listening in.
Thank you.
One of the things which I find very helpful is realizing that some people are a little bit more thought oriented, thinking about processes, trying to find the root cause, and some people are a little bit more hands-on in their approach. I tend to be a little more hands-on in my approach. I like to, kind of get out there into the world and do things and see how it impacts my thinking, and use those experiences and feedback to try and both better myself as well as dissolve my insecurities, specifically imposter syndrome. But I have, thought about using, or trying out the thought-based approach as well. And one thing which I found really helpful is to sit down with someone, and someone you trust, and talk to them about their insecurities and imposter syndrome, and help them dissolve their insecurities and imposter syndrome. If we can create kind of a safe space, a non-judgmental safe space where we can just get together and help each other out, that alone, it can be so helpful in helping one another dissolve imposter syndrome. And I feel that when we help others discover their strengths, we get better at helping ourselves discover our own strengths.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, if you struggle to tie your own shoelaces, you can help someone tie theirs, and in the process, you give yourself the muscle memory to tie your own shoelaces.
Yeah.
So I like to think of it as exactly the same.
That's so true. It's so true. And I think that's what drew me into coaching in the first place, because I started to help other medical writers succeed in their career. And it was only through doing that that I realized how successful I was, or have been. It's really strange. I experienced such a boost in self-esteem after I deliver a coaching session, because I see how much it helps them, and then I'm able to attribute that to myself and say, oh, I learned how to do that because I can see that this is helping them. And it's just that evidence, like you said, building up evidence that you are good at doing it. um, and if you're actually actively doing it and you're receiving that feedback and you're seeing that impact, it does change the way you start to think about it. And actually, one of the things I was going to suggest as a practical thing that people could do, um, one of the coaches that I've worked with, and I personally work with coaches a lot, mostly to help me with imposter syndrome, is she suggested that I started a document called Evidence of Success. And Dustin knows about this because I get him to put things in there all the time. So whenever a client or a friend or a student or somebody who has benefited from my advice or support in some way tells me that, whether it's on a call or in a Zoom meeting or through email or some comment or something, I just put it into that document, and I just have pages and pages and pages of all these quotes from people who have said all these things, and I sort of categorize them, and I look at it, and it's almost hard not to feel like I'm good at what I do when I see that. And I think having that active process of gathering it and looking at it and telling myself, like, you are really good at what you do, because these people are not all lying to you. That really helps me. So that might be something that you guys want to try.
Absolutely. I've tried a slightly different variant of the same method and found it very helpful. So the document that I was working on was called a value proposition, which is, essentially what makes you valuable as a person, what makes you valuable as an employee, what makes you valuable as a friend, what makes you valuable as a partner. You can put anything that you want in a value proposition, essentially statements which help you realize the value you're bringing to this world. And the other thing that I did was I was doing this along with a colleague. So a part of this process was that we would write our value propositions and then we would exchange them. So I would get my colleague's value proposition, and then I would give mine to my colleague. And we both had this responsibility that we would take so we had written the value proposition as bullet points, as separate bullet points. And our responsibility was to text one bullet point every day, right at the beginning of the day when the workday begins. So I would receive a text of a bullet point from my value proposition, and I would send out a text of a bullet point of my colleague's value proposition. And it's an amazing way to begin the day. You come into work and you look at your phone and there's a statement there which tells you about how valuable you are, and you respond to the sender with a statement of how valuable they are.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. Try it.
That sounds so great. I've seen so many versions of that as well, like email notifications or like reminders on a phone. Or one of my coaches asked me to write down a statement like 100 times, just to kind of, expose myself to it. No, I think these are all great suggestions, and I could keep talking for hours, but I want to make sure we get to some of you guys' questions. So, I mean, if you want to come on camera and ask your question, go ahead. I'll kind of get Dustin to kind of pick someone out. Maybe use the hand raising emoji, or just raise your hand on video. Otherwise, you can just type your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them. Shadi, I can see you've raised your hand. So maybe Dustin, if you can bring, oh, there you go. Hi, what's your question?
Hi, thank you very much for this amazing workshop. I knew that this would be a great one, but it's like it's exceeded my expectations so much. Thank you. I've learned so
Oh,
much.
you're
Yeah,
welcome.
my question is about rejection, how rejection plays a role in imposter syndrome, or does it like feed it or not, especially during the job hunting process when you're under a lot of pressure and rejection is a big part of it.
Yeah, great question. I'll let you answer that first, Anand.
Sure. Yeah, that's a very good observation. Rejection is kind of a huge hit, and it can take a lot out of us, both emotionally, physically. I feel so. I'm not an expert on this from a neuroscience perspective, but based on my experience, I feel that rejection is something which feeds imposter syndrome. That voice gets a little louder. So first off, it's important to recognize that. When I spoke with others about this, I was speaking with other medical writers about this, and I was also speaking with a career coach about this, and I got some really good insights. One of them, which I found very helpful, is to realize that rejection is part of the job search process. We often think about a job offer and job rejection as two opposing elements, as if they're like enemies, one versus the other. But it's important to realize that they're both, flowing in the same direction. An acceptance or a rejection is pushing your career in a certain way. They're both helping you flow in a certain direction. So it's not one thing versus another, it's one thing and another. You have small acceptances here and there, and the rejection is also small. You got to realize that in a job search process, it's probably 20 steps between having an initial conversation and signing the job offer. You have all these small steps in between. You got to speak with people. You have to do a site interview. Maybe you have a phone interview, maybe you have a Zoom interview, and maybe you have to go make a presentation. You have all these little steps in between the very first conversation and the offer. But we place a lot of emphasis on the rejection without reminding ourselves that we succeeded in 19 of those 20 steps. And if you succeeded in 19 of those 20 steps with one job, there's a very high likelihood that you can go the distance with another job.
Yeah, putting it into perspective, and again, like it's just one of those things that we're gonna face, whether we like it or not. And I think the people that tend to go after the things that they want more are the people who will feel it the most or be exposed to it the most. I do know from my experience that when I see rejection as a kind of a normal thing that happens all the time, I've learned to see it as evidence that I'm trying, that I'm putting myself out there, that I'm getting out of my comfort zone, I'm doing things I maybe wouldn't normally do, and there's going to be some pushback there, I think, sometimes. And that's normal. Like, so I see that and I think that means I'm doing a good thing. That means I'm trying. That means I'm challenging myself. I'm growing. And I'm not saying it doesn't hurt, because it does, but then it's, knowing how to talk about it, how to get support, and how to then, like Anand was saying, kind of compartmentalize it and look at the bigger picture and say, well, this is one thing that has happened in my entire life and it doesn't define me. So that's what I would say there. Thank you so much for that question. That was great. If anyone else wants to come on camera and ask the question, just raise your hand or do the emoji hand. Oh, we have one from Rohan. Hello.
Your talk. Firstly, I have two questions. Why is imposter syndrome called a syndrome and not a disorder? And number two, sorry, just a moment, please. Number two, you mentioned certain triggers. Could you elaborate more on those triggers of imposter syndrome?
Those are some very interesting questions. First off, it takes a lot of work by a lot of people to classify something as a disease. So if a feeling is not a disease, then syndrome is kind of a catch-all phrase that people usually give it when it's kind of a preface which which is used to describe certain things which cannot be classified as a disease because you have to put in a lot of research and a lot of insight. The benchmark for something to be classified as a disease is really high. So because of, a lot of ambiguities have to be settled with research from a scientific and medical standpoint. So I think that's the reason why it's called a syndrome and not a disease. And your second question, could you please repeat your second question?
So somewhere during the talk, you mentioned triggers. So if you could please elaborate more on certain triggers that we could pay attention to.
I think it depends on an individual basis. For me, when I was, reminded of something which I couldn't accomplish in the past, even though I tried very hard, that was, kind of a trigger for me. I just felt at the back of my mind that those same patterns are going to repeat themselves over and over. So when I was faced with a challenge, and I was facing a lot of difficulty with overcoming that challenge, I would immediately think of a few things in the past which I have not been able to accomplish. And I didn't know that this was my trigger until I began speaking about it with others who were open to talking about imposter syndrome. So past attempts at achieving an objective and not quite being able to get there was my trigger. And the only way that I could recognize it was by speaking with people. And once I recognized it, I began to see that thought approaching. And once you can see something approaching, you can kind of either dodge it or find a way to, avoid it or anticipate its arrival. And that makes it easier to cope.
Mm, yeah. And just to add to that, I would say as a very emotional person, a very, very sensitive person, I think I tend to be triggered more by people's emotional reactions to things, even if they don't actually have a direct association with something that I've said or I've done. If I'm even in a room with somebody who seems like they're angry or aggressive or they're not happy about something, my instinct is to think that I've done something wrong. And that could be a client, that could be a friend, that could be anyone in my life. And so I've learned to recognize that as a trigger for me, that just because this person is feeling that way or acting that way does not mean there's any direct attribution to myself, unless they are telling me like, you upset me, you've done something wrong. Then I can't, just assume that it's me who's at fault. So that's just another way of looking at what a trigger might be. I do want to get to some more questions. We only have a few minutes left. I'm just going to pick one from the chat. I can see you're all having a conversation in here, which is great. Is the syndrome more prevalent in a freelancing industry since we feel like we're hugely responsible and not like a NASA type teamwork in finishing a project? I mean, my answer to that is yes. I think whenever you are more isolated in general, you're more likely to feel that attribution, that sense of pressure and responsibility that we were talking about in the beginning. You're more likely to feel like everything's on me. I have to figure this out. I have to do a good job. If it doesn't work out, it's my fault, rather than kind of seeing it as a collective, like a team effort or something that is still being learned. And I think freelancing sort of naturally puts you in that more vulnerable position. What do you think, Anand?
That's some really great insight, and thank you for the question. So I've worked in a freelance role as well as in a full-time role, and I've also felt this, slightly stronger when I was in a freelance role, compared to a full-time role where I was working in a team. But then again, I was in a freelance role very early in my career, and I didn't have as much experience. And I was in a full-time role when I had a little bit more experience. So I don't know whether those feelings were a result of my inexperience, or if it was because of the fact that I was freelance. I guess I don't have enough to kind of pinpoint an answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, in my experience, so I would just say, and this kind of segues me into what I wanted to mention at the end of the session as well. At Prospology, we work with predominantly freelance medical writers. So people who are either just becoming freelance, so they've only been working full time as an employee, and they've just started to get their first 1 or 2 clients, or they're making the jump. They don't have any clients of their own yet. And so I think I see imposter syndrome so much more since we've started to specialize in supporting freelancers, because there's this feeling of, I only know how to be an employee. I don't know how to be a business owner. It's a completely different mindset to be in, and it's a completely different sort of headspace and persona that you take on almost, because it's a different way of using your skill set. Suddenly, instead of just being required to produce writing and to keep clients happy, you have this whole other skill set that you need to use, from the finance and the taxes to the negotiations, the sales, the contracts, finding the clients, the client acquisition, and having those initial meetings with them. So the networking and the informational interviews, or the pitching, or however you want to approach that. And so you're having to manage all of that for the first time, and you don't have your colleagues there, or your manager or your boss or somebody telling you that you're doing a good job. So it all comes from you, unless you have a coach, or unless you have a partner, or somebody who's kind of standing by you. And so I try to really take on that role as that supporting outside source, where I can say, look, I have the perspective that you can't have because you're in it so closely. And I can tell you, as somebody who's been in this field for a long time, who's done well, that you are doing a good job, that you have all the pieces you need to succeed. That is like, this is a normal thing that happens. This is how you can pivot and get back on track. This is how you pick yourself up and get back out there again. And, I can look at their writing. I can tell them it's good. I can tell them how to improve it if it's not good. And I can give them the tough love that they need, or I can push them when they need to be pushed, or I can make it easier on them if it needs to be made easier. And so I think having that support is so important for freelancers. And if anyone does need extra support with their business, or they're thinking of jumping from full-time to freelance, do reach out. Our website is prospology.com. My email is sophie@prospology.com. I'm just putting it in the chat now. And we do these events every month, so you're welcome to keep showing up and being part of our community. But yeah, we offer both one-on-one and group coaching options, so feel free to reach out if you're interested in that. But yeah, I think we'll just kind of summarize. I'll summarize what we've covered, and then Anand, if you think I've missed anything, let me know. I think what I've really gotten out of the session is being able to identify that imposter syndrome is a chronic syndrome. So it's a collection of feelings and beliefs and experiences that we have when we feel like we're not good enough, or we feel like there's evidence of success there, but we're not able to really internalize it ourselves. That makes us feel like pressure to succeed, or there's pressure there that doesn't need to be there. And it shows up in so many different ways for different people. And I think the best way to sort of handle it, or to sort of start changing those thought processes, is to realize that it is part of the human condition. It's something that a lot of people have, that is something that we can actively choose to not automatically feel and succumb to, but something that we can instead decide maybe this isn't working well for me. Maybe this is something I want to address. And the best ways to do that is to be proactive about how you show up for people, supporting other people through doing what you're trying to do or what you have been able to do, to see that benefit on them, and to recognize your own successes and document the success that you have, and have support systems and be able to talk about it, and just keep showing up for yourself and getting the support that you need. Does that kind of summarize it? Do you have any closing words, Anand?
Absolutely. I think you said it beautifully well. I don't want to say anything to, to embellish what you said any further. I think that sums it up perfectly.
Oh, that's so great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We would love to see you again at one of our future events. We have a mailing list. If you want to join, we'll put the link in the event in LinkedIn, just because it'll disappear in a minute. But yeah, if you do have an interest in coaching support, reach out to me, Sophie at Prospology. .com. I actually left off the end of my email, or you can visit our website, prospology.com. Thank you so much. I hope that you found it valuable, and we hope to see you again soon. And thank you, Anand, for being our co-host. You're amazing.
Absolutely. And, anyone on this call, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn, or, just send me a message. I'm always ready to talk about this, and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you succeed.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye.
Guys.